So thankful to be together tonight, grateful for your presence, especially we have several visitors with us, really glad that you can be here to honor our God and look into His Word for a while with us and hopefully find some things that will encourage you to live for Him in a more effective way. Appreciate the songs that Will led tonight, really several of them, a couple of them go right along with the lesson. I'm sure he did that on purpose and we're thankful for that. Be Still My Soul is one of my favorites, and it really speaks to us of reliance on God. Brother Bill Hall, when he was here not long ago, preached a lesson about how the Lord will provide. Yesterday, Sandy asked me what I was preaching on, and I told her what the nice lesson was, and she said, "Didn't Bill Hall just preach on that?" She's a great encouragement to me. I said, "Yes, but I'm not Bill Hall." Bill did talk about, of course, the Lord providing for us and us being able to rely on that. I'd like us to focus tonight on pretty much the same idea, but us looking for that and looking for it in specific areas in our lives. The lesson that he preached was just so wonderful. I thought the whole meeting was. I'm sure you did as well. Just so uplifting. And those thoughts particularly deserve to be brought to the front of our minds on a pretty regular basis. Yesterday was 9/11, and I still remember, as many of you do, that tragedy very vividly. Most of us, if we were alive then and old enough to remember anything, can tell folks where we were and when we found out about that plane going into the first tower and the events of that day. I remember very, very clearly all through that day. Isn't that something? Thousands of days have occurred since then, but I remember that day. And I remember being very, very interested in the news broadcasts and continuing to get news. We didn't know what was going on. We didn't know who did it at first, what their purpose was. When we were told who they were and what their purpose was, we just sort of said, "What? What? How can this be?" And for the first time, a lot of children in our country felt unsafe, felt that our country might be unsafe. And I've had a lot of young people tell me that experience. So a lot came out of that. It affected me. It affected our whole country. And I don't think we've had a time period since then like that until this pandemic. And it's affected us not so dramatically and not so where we remember the one day, but we're really interested, concerned about, some of us obsessed with what's going on related to the pandemic and the political things involved with all of that go on daily as well. Some of us have just had to turn away from the news because it bothers us so much. It's probably not a bad idea. But I want you to know tonight, and the Lord wants you to know, that He's your helper. And that if you're a child of His, whatever's going on in the world, He's there to help you. Nothing escapes His notice. You do not escape His notice. He cares about you. And if you trust Him, that's all you need to know, that He cares about you. And He is the God of all creation. Someone has said that whatever we focus on determines what we become. And that's sort of shades of this morning's lesson, isn't it? Whatever we focus on determines what we become. If we focus on worldly things, we'll be worldly. If we focus on heavenly things, we'll be heavenly. If we focus on problems and negative, we'll be problematic and negative. If we focus on God and His power, we'll be at peace. What are we going to focus on? What we focus on, we empower and enlarge. It becomes bigger in our lives because we're thinking about it. You know that experience, right? It's really maybe not even that big a thing, but when you think about it, and the more you think about it, the bigger it gets. Whatever we think about, we empower and enlarge. So good multiplies when we focus on that which is good. And God is magnified when we focus on Him, magnified in our lives. That very word means to make bigger, doesn't it? And the Bible tells us to magnify the Lord. But also negativity multiplies when we focus upon it. So the choice is ours. What is it that you want to be more aware of in your life? How do you want your life to be? How do you want the mood of it to be? Your surroundings to be? You say, well, I can't determine my surroundings. You really kind of can. The way you perceive life. You pretty much determine that. I want to start by looking at Matthew chapter 6, and then we'll spend most of the rest of our time tonight in the Psalms. But in Matthew chapter 6 and in verse 22, Jesus is in the middle of the Sermon on the Mount. And you remember, He's talked about not laying up for yourselves treasures on earth, but laying up for yourselves treasures in heaven. So He's talking about this dichotomy between the physical and the spiritual. And then He'll go on and talk about, no man can serve two masters. Either he'll hate the one, love the other. Hold to one, despise the other. You can't serve God and mammon. And then He'll talk about, don't worry. We looked at that last part of that section. Don't worry about what you're going to eat, what you're going to wear, all of that. Don't worry about all that. So sandwiched right smack in the middle of all of that discussion is Matthew chapter 6 and verse 22. The lamp of the body is the eye. If therefore your eye is good, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. If therefore the light that is in you is darkness, how great is that darkness? No one can serve two masters. Either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will be loyal to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon. So the last part of that was a lot of what the lesson was about this morning. But what He's saying to us, what Jesus is saying to us is, what you focus on, what you look at, that gets in you. And if you're focusing on darkness, your inside will be dark. And if you're focusing on light, the inside of you will be light. So are we going to focus on the problems, or are we going to focus on the solution to the problems? Are we going to focus on the tragedies, or the one who's going to help us through the tragedies? That's our choice. The lamp of the body is the eye. What are you going to look at? What are you going to focus on? The Psalms encourage us to look to the Lord for help, and it uses that visual language. That's the point I want you to get. That as we transition over to looking at a few Psalms tonight that help us get help from the Lord, that visual language is used in two Psalms in particular. I'd like you to look at Psalm 121, and then we'll look at Psalm 123 in just a moment. Both of these Psalms make a point of encouraging us to lift up our eyes. Psalm 121 in verse 1, I will lift up my eyes to the hills. Well, why would I do that? I will lift up my eyes to the hills from whence my help comes. That's why. Well, what are you talking about? You're looking up to the hills and the Appalachian Mountains, or what are we supposed to be looking at there? How's our help coming from the hills? Psalm 121, and also this whole section of Psalms, Psalm 123 as well, are Psalms of ascent. The very word ascent means to go up or to look at that which is up, right? And we believe, most everybody who's thought about that, studied it, scholars and laymen as well, whoever, believe that these Psalms were sung as people went up to Jerusalem for the yearly festivals as well, primarily, but anytime they would go up to worship. And if you've ever been to Jerusalem, you know that where the temple was on a hill. We sing the songs about Zion. It was on Zion. And Jerusalem, in fact, is built on hills. There's no way you can get to it without going up a hill. I will look to the hills. The hills on which Jerusalem was built is what the psalmist is saying. The hills where the temple is and where God dwells and where I'm going to worship Him. I will look to the hills, from whence my help comes. That's his point. So when you need help, who are you looking to? What are you looking to? We don't look to physical Jerusalem, we look to heavenly Jerusalem, to heaven itself, where the book of Revelation tells us the temple is. And God is there, and he is our help. My help comes from the Lord, who made heaven and earth. Verse 2. My help comes from the Lord, who made heaven and earth. And then look at Psalm 123. In verse 1, again, it identifies itself. In most Bibles, it should say a song of ascents. Unto you I lift up my eyes, O you who dwell in the heavens. Behold, as the eyes of servants look to the hand of their masters, as the eyes of a maid to the hand of her mistress, so our eyes look to the Lord our God until he has mercy on us. We will look to the Lord when we need help. He is, after all, not only the one who dwells in the heavens, but the one who's made all. He is our master. And so as you go through the Psalms, there are at least 18 Psalms, besides these two, that encourage us to look to the Lord for help in all sorts of different circumstances. I'm going to read one or two verses from all 18 Psalms. So y'all buckle your seatbelts, okay? Everybody ready? You got your seatbelts in, hands, right? Everything in. Here we go. Psalm 12 and verse 1. Help, Lord, for the godly man ceases, for the faithful disappear from among the sons of men. Psalm 22 and verse 19. But you, O Lord, do not be far from me. O my strength, hasten to help me. Psalm 33 and verse 20. Our soul waits for the Lord. He is our help and our shield. Psalm 37 and verse 40. And the Lord shall help them and deliver them. He shall deliver them from the wicked and save them because they trust him. Psalm 38 and verse 22. Make haste to help me, O Lord, my salvation. Psalm 40 and verse 13. Be pleased, O Lord, to deliver me. O Lord, make haste to help me. Psalm 40 and verse 17. I am poor and needy, yet the Lord thinks upon me. You are my help and my deliverer. Do not delay, O my God. Psalm 70 and verse 1. Make haste, O God, to deliver me. Make haste to help me, O Lord. Psalm 70 and verse 5. I am poor and needy. Make haste to me, O God. You are my help and deliverer. O Lord, do not delay. Psalm 94 and verse 17. Unless the Lord had been my help, my soul would have settled in silence. Psalm 109 and verse 26. Help me, O Lord my God. O save me according to your mercy. Psalm 115 and verse 9 and verse 10 and verse 11. O Israel, trust in the Lord. He is their help and their shield. O house of Aaron, trust in the Lord. He is their help and their shield. O you who fear the Lord, trust in the Lord. He is their help and their shield. Psalm 118, verse 7. The Lord is for me among those who help me. Therefore I shall see my desire on those who hate me. Psalm 121 and verse 2. My help comes from the Lord, who made heaven and earth. 124 and verse 8. Our help is in the name of the Lord, who made heaven and earth. Psalm 146 and verse 5. Happy is he who has the God of Jacob for his help, whose hope is in the Lord his God. I feel like the Lord's trying to tell us something. Do you? He's our help. We can call on him for help. Call on him for help. Why do we go through life with all of the personal tragedies and national tragedies and problems that we have and health problems and spiritual problems, and relational problems and work problems, and we need help everywhere we turn, and we don't turn for help. How can that be? In the time we have remaining this evening, I want to look at just 6 of these Psalms in a little more detail. Just 6 of them. And we're not going to look at the whole Psalm, just a few verses in each one. But I want us to see how the things that are in these Psalms are for us today. They deal directly with the exact things we are facing right in the here and now. And in every case, the psalmist says, turn to the Lord for help. Let us lift up our eyes and look to the Lord when society is eaten up with liars and scammers and con men. By the way, how's your car warranty? Psalm 12 and verse 1. Help, Lord, for the godly man ceases. The faithful disappear from among the sons of men. Who can you trust anymore? Who can you trust in this world that we're living in nowadays? The faithful disappear from the sons of men. They speak idly, everyone with his neighbor. With flattering lips and a double heart they speak. That's the world we're living in. And the first thing he says is, help, Lord, in this world. He says in verse 3, may the Lord cut off all flattering lips and the tongue that speaks proud things, who said, with our tongue we will prevail, our lips are our own. Who is Lord over us? People say what they want to say, try to get by with whatever they can get by with, tell you anything to get their way, to deprive you of your money, to deprive you of your happiness, to deprive you of whatever, to oppress you. For the oppression of the poor, for the sighing of the needy, now I will arise, says the Lord. I will set him in the safety for which he yearns. God will help you. God will help us. In a world like this, where we can't find a faithful person, where it doesn't seem you can trust hardly anybody. We all get 10 phone calls a day of people that you can't trust, let alone the people we interact with on a day-to-day basis, let alone our government leaders, let alone those who, claim to have our best interest at heart in society. Let us lift up our eyes and look to the Lord for help when calamity strikes, when really bad things happen. Maybe there's a storm, a pandemic, a famine. Psalm 33 and verse 16. No king is saved by the multitude of an army. A mighty man is not delivered by great strength. Well, we found that to be true this last week or two, right? You think the Afghan army is a lot bigger than the Army of the United States? I don't think so. Well, we just lost a war to them. How about that? I don't think the size of the army matters much. I think the will of God does. A horse is a vain hope for safety, neither shall it deliver any by its strength. Behold, the eye of the Lord is on those who fear him, on those who hope in his mercy, to deliver their soul from death and to keep them alive in famine. God cares about those who fear and respect him. And so in verse 20, our soul waits for the Lord. He is our help and our shield. God's in control. God cares about his people. And if he lets something happen to us that's bad, that's okay too, because we trust him. We trust him. All of this gets back to trust in God. Isaiah prophesied in Isaiah chapter 31 and verse 1, and he was talking to future Israel, if you will, about bad things they were going to experience, invading armies, all sorts of bad. And he tells them, don't don't look for help down in Egypt or from other countries. Look for help from God during those calamitous times. Psalm 31 and verse 1, woe to those who go down to Egypt for help or rely on horses, who trust in chariots because they are many, and in horsemen because they are very strong, who do not look to the Holy One of Israel, nor seek the Lord. I have news for you. While I have great respect for those in the armed services who are protecting our country, and I know God has ordained them, our country is not protected by our armed services. If God wants our country to fall, it won't matter how big our army is, guys. It won't matter. God alone is the shield around any nation. He determines who rises and falls. I want you to go in your Bibles back to 2 Kings. And a pretty familiar and amazing story in chapter 6 and 7 in the days of Elisha. Syria had come against Samaria and besieged it. And I remember visiting Samaria. You can easily see how that would happen. It's way up on a rocky hill, virtually impenetrable. I can't imagine anybody ever breaking through there. It's just an amazing place to have a fortress, but it's easily surrounded. You know, there's no doubt about that. And so multiple times in history, it has been besieged. And this was maybe one of the worst times. Syria besieges it. And as the text explains, Ben-Hadad, the king of Syria, comes with his army. This is verse 24. He besieges Samaria. There's a great famine in Samaria. And indeed, they besieged it until a donkey's head was sold for 80 shekels of silver. What's for lunch, Mom? A donkey's head if you can come up with 80 shekels of silver. Can you even imagine? That's what people were eating. Beyond that, 1/4 of a cab of dove droppings for 5 shekels. Yum. Can you imagine the horrible straits these people were in to be driven to that for their food? As the king of Israel was passing by on the wall, a woman cried out to him and said, "Help, help, my lord, O king." She's calling to the king for help. And he said, "If the Lord does not help you, where can I find help for you?" He knows he's powerless to help her. And he says, "What's wrong?" And you know the gruesome story. She said, "This woman said to me, 'Give me your son, and we may eat him today, and we'll eat my son tomorrow.' So we boiled my son and ate him. And I said to her on the next day, 'Give me your son, that we may eat him.' And she's hidden her son." I don't know what kind of calamity you think we've been through. We hadn't been through that. But only the Lord could help. The text tells us that when it happened, when the king heard the words of the woman, that he tore his clothes. And he passed by on the wall, and the people looked, and there underneath he had sackcloth on his body. It was a miserable situation. The king, interestingly, blames Elisha, the prophet. And he says, Elisha's got to be responsible for this. I'm going to go take off his head. He's just basically going to take it out on somebody. But he's going to go to Elisha, and we're going to take Elisha. We're going to remove Elisha's head from his body. Of course, Elisha's a prophet of God. He knows when folks are coming. It's already been shown in the book of 2 Kings. You can't really sneak up on Elisha. But the king tries to. But he gets there with his messenger. And you get into chapter 7, and Elisha says, just wait a minute. He says in verse 1, Elisha said, "Hear the word of the Lord. Thus says the Lord, tomorrow about this time, a seah of fine flour shall be sold for a shekel, and 2 seahs of barley for a shekel at the gate of Samaria." Right here in the entrance to the city, we'll be selling food like it's going out of style. And for nothing, practically. Tomorrow, this will happen. And the guard officer, one of the king's men, answered the man of God and said, "Look, if the Lord would make windows in heaven, could this thing be?" In other words, this can't happen if the Lord would make windows in heaven. As if the Lord's not going to make windows in heaven. Well, he couldn't do that. Nothing's impossible with God. He can help however he wants to help. And you know the story. Because what happens that night is that the Syrians think they hear the sound of chariots and an army coming, and they believe that Israel has hired either the Hittites or the Egyptians to come up against them, and they head for home. They just hightail it out of there, and they leave everything in their camp. Their food, their tents, everything. And the next day, these lepers who were in the gate of Samaria just sort of walk out intending to surrender to the Syrians so they get themselves something to eat, and there's nobody in the Syrian camp. And they're there enjoying the spoils of the spoils. and then one turns to the other and said, "You know what? We probably ought to go back and tell people in the city what's happened here." And sure enough, the next day, there was a huge crowd of people in the gate of Samaria because the Lord had opened the windows of heaven. But the man who said he wouldn't do that, and he implied he couldn't do that, was trampled by the crowd of people who'd gone to get the food. What a story. Where does help come from? That's the point. It comes from God. It doesn't matter how dire the situation looks. Nothing is impossible with God. And whatever the calamity, God is our helper. And as the New Testament says, He can do exceedingly abundantly above all that we can ask or think. That's our God. God is our helper when the wicked are in power. In Psalm 37 and verse 35, "I have seen the wicked in great power." You and me both, right? "I have seen the wicked in great power and spreading himself like a native green tree. Yet he passed away, and behold, he was no more. Indeed, I sought him, but he could not be found. Mark the blameless man, and observe the upright, for the future of that man is peace. But the transgressors shall be destroyed together. The future of the wicked shall be cut off. But the salvation of the righteous is from the Lord. He is their strength in time of trouble. And the Lord shall help them. The Lord shall help them and deliver them. He shall deliver them from the wicked and save them because they trust in Him." Now, as Brother Hall reminded us the other night, that might not happen in one generation. It might not happen in several generations, but it will happen. The wicked will not always be in power. And God has a plan for the righteous and a hope in this world and the world to come. And He has promised to help. Related to that, when government devises evil by law, the Lord will help. In the 94th Psalm, in verse 17, "Unless the Lord had been my help, my soul would soon have settled in silence. If I say, my foot slips, your mercy, O Lord, will hold me up. In the multitude of my anxieties within me, your comforts delight my soul. Shall the throne of iniquity, which devises evil by law, have fellowship with you? They gather together against the life of the righteous and condemn innocent blood. But the Lord has been my defense, and my God, the rock of my salvation. He has brought on them their own iniquity, and shall cut them off in their own wickedness. The Lord our God shall cut them off. That's what I believe. Now, I've seen government devising evil by law. I've seen it in my lifetime. You have too. But it's not going to stand. Those who've done it are not going to stand. Not forever. They'll be cut off from this world and from eternal hope. We may leave this world as well, but the difference is we have eternal hope. And the Lord will help us ultimately here and in the world to come. Let's lift up our eyes to the Lord when we're persecuted for righteousness' sake. Back in Psalm 38 now, in verse 19. My enemies are vigorous, and they are strong. And those who hate me wrongfully have multiplied. I think we're going to find more and more of that in the years to come, likely. That there will be a lot of people who just hate folks who are trying to serve the Lord. Those also who render evil for good. They are my adversaries because I follow what is good. Many of you have experienced that in your lives as you've tried to do the right thing at work or at school. And in your life. They're your adversaries because you follow what is good. But then he says, do not forsake me, O Lord. O my God, do not be far from me. Make haste and help me, O Lord of my salvation. He's relying on the Lord to help him, even when he's persecuted for righteousness' sake, for doing the right thing. And when he's burdened with his own sin, he still calls on the Lord for help. Here is maybe the most important lesson we'll learn tonight. In the 40th Psalm in verse 12, the psalmist says, for innumerable evils have surrounded me. My iniquities have overtaken me, so that I am not able to look up. Can I just stop right there? If you're an adult of conscience, you have experienced that in your life. Maybe many times. When you have been so disappointed in yourself because of your sins and your spiritual failures that you just could not lift up your eyes. But that's the one thing we have to do. Not to lift up our eyes in pride. Not to lift up our eyes in, well, that's okay, just get over it, it'll be all right. But to lift up our eyes to the Lord. Because he'll help us. I have found over and over and over and over again in my life that whenever I turn to the Lord for spiritual help, he is always there. My iniquities have overtaken me so that I'm not able to look up. They are more than the hairs of my head. Therefore my heart fails me. Be pleased, O Lord, to deliver me. O Lord, make haste to help me. Verse 17, I am poor and needy, yet the Lord thinks upon me. You are my help and my deliverer. Do not delay, O my God. As poor and needy, as worthless and helpless as I am, still, he helps me. Even though. You know, tonight, as we reflect on the Lord being our helper, as we lift up our eyes to him, I'm encouraged by what the psalmist has to say to us in Psalm 146. In verse 5, he says, happy is he who has the God of Jacob for his help. I am so thankful, so happy, so joyous and glad that we have the God of Jacob for our help, and that our hope is in the Lord, the one who, he goes on to say, made heaven and earth, the sea and all that's in them, who keeps truth forever, who executes justice for the oppressed, who gives food to the hungry. The Lord gives freedom to the prisoners. The Lord opens the eyes of the blind. The Lord raises those who are bowed down. I am happy that the Lord is my help. And I hope you are too. When we turn to the pages of the New Testament, the Hebrew writer in Hebrews chapter 13, verses 5 and 6, sort of mashes two psalms together when he encourages us to let our conduct, he says, be without covetousness, be content with such things as you have. For the Lord himself has said, I will never leave you nor forsake you. So we may boldly say, the Lord is my helper. I will not fear. What can man do to me? I'm so happy that the Lord is my helper. I hope you are too. And I hope he is your helper tonight, and you've turned to him for help for your spiritual needs. If that's not the case, and you've sinned in a public way, you've got a great opportunity tonight to confess that. We'll pray with you and for you, and I guarantee that God will help. And if you're not a member of the Lord's church tonight, if you're not a Christian, and you choose to become one, we'd ask you to come while we stand and while we sing.